a sense of community when you're free. Rolling through the mountains, rolling through the valley, rolling through paradise with me.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Small Talk. I'm your host, Nancy Guitar. Returning for, I don't know the count now, is Richard Irving. He's going to be giving a talk, not an interview. So while he's speaking, I'm going to be turning my camera off if I can figure out where it is. Oh, yeah, I see where it is. So anyway, Richard, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. The talk today is really about some questions that Canadians need to discuss. And I'm going to see if I can pull up my PowerPoint here, if I can share my screen. Can people see that?
No.
No, okay. Then we won't bother with that. We'll just talk. So I've been listening to the political discourse in this country for a long time. And it seems to be getting worse and worse. So these days, it seems either focused on political issues, that some which are trivial, such as images in our passports and ad hominem attacks on various political figures, or pandering to political expediency. And I think that what's lacking right now are forums where Canadians can have very mature discussions about what's actually going on in the world. And there's some reasons for this deterioration in the quality. I think part of it is due to social media, which has exacerbated existing fractal lines in our country. As you search social media, the algorithms they use keep changing what you get to reflect what it sees your preferences may be. And so if you happen to click on a right-wing site, you'll start to get more and more right-wing news feeds and things. If it's a left-wing site, you'll get more and more left-wing feeds. And eventually, you will be getting a tremendous amount of information that's very, very narrow. And that's part of it. But there's a lot of other issues and bases for conflict. And the people that look at conflict say, well, you know what? There's about 4 or 5 bases. There's conflict of values, which we have, and our access to information and the social media just exacerbates that. So, for example, we have different ways of life or ideologies. One example would be the current conflict we see in the US between those who believe in the right to choose for a woman and those who believe in the right to life. And those are different value systems that are in conflict. Or the conflict between authoritarianism, used to be communism, and open liberal democracy. Those values are clearly in conflict. But there's other sources that we have. Data conflict. People may have different sources of information. They may understand them differently. And unfortunately, in today's environment, there's a lot of sources of disinformation. So 2 people in conflict, part of what we have to do is sort out where's the information coming from. There's structural conflict, unequal authority. There are people in our society who feel totally left out, and they're angry about it, and they respond to it. That may have been part of the basis for some of the truckers and truckers' convoy in Ottawa a while back. Relationship conflict, stereotyping. So once we start labeling and stereotyping people, a lot of folks react very strongly to being stereotyped. And the problem with stereotyping a group, be it LGBTQ, right-to-lifers, fundamentalist Christians, extreme liberals, or whoever, is that you put them in a very narrow box, which is very likely inaccurate. And there's relationship conflicts, interest conflicts. So, for example, in the Middle East right now, in Israel, part of the conflict is based on competition over land and interests. The Israelis need land, Palestinians need land, and there doesn't seem to be any sensible way to resolve that. So we have all these bases of conflict, but the people who study conflict and conflict resolution and who are actively participate, so it's a combination of academics, diplomats, negotiators, and things who have contributed to a body of knowledge, say, look, here are a few things that you need to do to have a respectful dialogue. Treat the other people with respect. So what we used to say when I took a course in conflict resolution, go hard on the problem, go easy on the people. So don't confuse the person with the issue. You address the issue, treat the person well. You also, to help resolve dialogues or have a dialogue with somebody who really disagrees with you, you have to engage in active listening. And I'll get back more with that later. But essentially, you're working very hard to understand what the person's position is, and listening to them is a gift that you can give them that will perhaps make them more disposed to listen to you. Avoid labeling. Instead of putting a label on a person, try to keep an open mind about who they are and what they're trying to do. The problem with labels is that they hide as much as they illuminate. In the same way that a map isn't the territory. And if anybody has ever taken a topographical map, which shows you a lot of information, but it doesn't tell you where all the brush, thorn bushes, and rocks are. So it's very different than the territory. Labels tend to blind you to some things that you should pay attention to. And finally, if we're trying to have a productive dialogue, instead of going for win-win, what we need to do is instead of going for win-lose, we need to go for win-win. And to get there, you need to understand the root causes of where the person is coming from. And the root causes are the underlying events or situations that cause them to adopt a particular position. Very often, when people take a position on an issue, their position reflects a symptom, not a cause. So they may have an extreme position about one of our politicians, be he liberal or conservative, and it may not reflect how they feel about the particular person. It may, but it may also reflect how they feel about some situation in their life of which this person maybe is a cause or just a symbol. So we need to dig down a little bit to understand why a person holds a particular situation. So, for example, with a truckers' convoy, the interesting question to me is what situations in their lives led them to believe that this was a reasonable course of action. And I think if you could understand those situations, you would go some way towards being able to address some of their underlying concerns. So how do you do that? How do you open up a dialogue? Well, there are some things that you can do. And I'm going to get to the questions in a minute for Canadians, but to open up a dialogue, whether you're in a church group, you're meeting at a Tim Hortons, you're in a book club, you're in some kind of a social club or a Rotary club or something, and you're talking to people and trying to understand how they feel about some big questions, there are three ways to approach it. One are open-ended questions. So how do you feel about X? So you saw the Prime Minister on TV last night talking about housing policy. Did you see that? You did. Well, how do you feel about that? And then listen to them. And after they've talked a bit and expressed some things, you could try a reflective question to show that you understood what they were saying. So you feel that. So you reflect what they were saying back to them. In some cases, they'll say, no, that's not what I meant. You realize you were mistaken. In other cases, you'll just reinforce with them the fact that you have gone to the trouble to understand what their problem was. And then if there's some areas when you're having a discussion where you sense there's some agreement, you try directive questions. So you agree that and fill in the blank, and that will give you some sense of how far you can go in creating some kind of an agreement. Now, some of you will say, well, these are very technical kinds of things. There are 3 questions. And years ago, I was doing a project management seminar in Calgary, of all places, with project accountants. And we had about 30 people in the room. One of them was a guy who clearly had been ordered to attend and did not want to be there. So he gave me grief the whole time. When I talked about these 3 questions, the open-ended, reflective, and directive, he said, oh, come on, Dr. Irving, these things are so obvious. Nobody in their right mind would be fooled by that. So I said, well, so you feel that most people would see right through it? He said, well, yes. And then he went on for a bit. And I said, well, do you agree, though, that if you could use these things effectively, it would open up dialogue? Well, yes. And I went through all 3 questions 2 or 3 times. Well, as I said, there were 30 people in the room, and 29 of the people there knew what was going on. And eventually he just stopped dead and he said, you're doing it to me, aren't you? I said, yes, I am. And I couldn't have had a better illustration of how these things work to open up a discussion. So let's assume you're sitting with your neighbors, you're in a club or a group situation, and you're just chewing the fat, and you want to open up some discussions. Well, you can use those questions, but here are some questions that I don't see being addressed well publicly. We're talking about housing, we're talking about a lot of things, but here are some other ones. How big should Canada be? 40 million, is that the right number? 50 million, 100 million? I believe that Dominique Barton, who used to be our ambassador to China and was a senior consultant, said that we should be maybe at 100 million by the turn of the next century. Well, why? What is the optimal population for Canada, and how do we determine that? And is there any open discussion about immigration and how much immigration we need? Clearly, we're falling behind in producing babies, so we need replacement, but how much, and how much can we absorb, and how fast? Another question that's related to that is the growth rate of our economy. Everything I've heard is based upon a growth economy. We got to grow. We got to get bigger. We got to do more. Well, there is no such thing as infinite growth, even if we believe there is. And in Canada, our growth is limited by our terrain. There's parts of Canada that will not support a large population. Maybe with global warming that'll change, but it's not changing right now. So what I would like to see is a discussion with academics, economists, government, and just regular citizens about, can we develop a steady state model of our economy that does not assume continual growth or unlimited growth? We probably have to think about how climate change will affect our growth and the size of our economy. We might need to factor in how a transition to a green economy affects things, but I have not seen any broad-based intelligent discussion of these issues. And I would like to know how the average Canadian feels. Here's another question. What is the best way to arrange Canadian society so that we all have access to healthy food, clean water, and safe and affordable housing? How do we do that? Maybe a guaranteed income is the best way to go. Maybe there's another model that works better. And I guess at some point people will say, well, does everybody actually have a right to all these things? A lot of us feel they do, but maybe there's an argument on the other side. But I'd like to see some intelligent discussion about it. And related to that, what do we have to do to ensure that as a country, we can control our resources and we're self-sustaining? The COVID epidemic showed us that we didn't have the ability to create our own vaccines. Well, now that's being corrected. What other things can we not do? The French had a phrase for this, maître chez nous, masters in our own house. Well, Canadians need to be masters in their own house. And we can't outsource everything. We can't depend upon the US. We can't depend upon China. We can't depend upon Europe. We have to say, what do we have to do to be largely self-sufficient, and if things fall apart, become totally self-sufficient? Here's another question you can worry about and discuss, and I think we need action on. How do we rebalance our political systems? I'm talking federal, provincial, and municipal, so that long-term problems are addressed. Right now, every 4 months, every 4 years, we have an election. Well, suppose to solve a problem takes 10 years. If we elect the same government, maybe they will make progress on it, maybe they won't. If we elect a different government, there's a tendency for the new government to throw out all the policies of the old government and just head off in a different direction, which does not help us solve these problems. Furthermore, how do we effectively deal with cross-jurisdictional issues? Housing crosses both municipal and provincial boundaries, and we'd like to see the feds involved. Healthcare. It's a provincial responsibility, but it's substantially funded by the feds. Cross-jurisdictional issues and management of them in an effective and timely way is an issue that needs to be considered. There are other issues. For example, our Indigenous people, very rightly, have raised concerns about how they've been treated in the past, about rectifying injustices, and adjusting Canadian society to recognize those problems. And we had slavery in the past. We had people who were associated with slavery. And as a result, what we've done is looked at our history, and we've removed some of it because we felt that the people who we were honoring should not be honored. So I guess the question is, can we focus on addressing past injustices, focus on the future, and at the same time not eliminate the past? Is there a way to honor people for what they did that was good, recognize what they did that was not good, and in some cases terrible, and honor people who did not get honored in such a way that everyone feels they are being treated fairly? I don't know if we can, but wouldn't it be nice if we could? Here's another question for you. How can we provide excellent education at all levels and of all types while maintaining quality and providing appropriate support? And in Ontario, we've seen the damage that was caused by the Ford government entering into public-private partnerships with very little control. So there are third, fourth, and fifth rate educational institutions that have partnered with a public or a private entity that offers certificates and degrees of very questionable value to foreign students. And that gives us several problems. One is we're bringing people into the country with no place to put them. Conestoga College apparently is bringing in about 30,000 foreign students, and they haven't built any residences. But there are other institutions that are offering certificates and degrees of very little value with the promise they can get Canadian citizenship when very likely they cannot. So these people who have spent maybe the life savings of their parents to come to Canada and get what was promised to be an education end up eventually going home. And if they're not going home and they manage to stay here, they're not very happy. So they're bad-mouthing Canada and bad-mouthing our education system, which affects the legitimate education systems that are legitimately offering high-quality education to foreign students. But it's not just that. The fact that Ontario, and I'm dealing with Ontario because I know the stats better than elsewhere, has the highest graduation from high school rate that it's ever had, and probably the highest in Canada, doesn't necessarily mean what it appears to mean. The politicians can say, oh yeah, we've improved education, but what's the quality of that? I know for a fact that some high schools are just passing students through. They're not failing. So they end up getting a high school diploma, but they haven't learned very much. Well, what good is that? That means when they go to university, some of them will apply to university, they will get in, and it will be a very rude awakening. And then universities have to either flunk them out or make up for the lack in their education by developing special training programs. So it just shifts the cost and damages quality. What we need is high quality, high access, and support so that anyone who has the capability of learning a trade, university degree program, a doctorate, or whatever, can do so. And I guess one of the final questions that I think Canadians need to address and discuss are how can we ensure equity and maintain quality and effectiveness across all areas of society? We want everyone who can participate in our society and in our economic system to do so and be encouraged to do so. So it doesn't matter if you're a different ethnic background, racial background, sexual orientation, or you have differing levels of ability, you should be able to participate as much as you possibly can, should you want to. At the same time, we should not be discouraging people from applying to jobs and trying to be upwardly mobile, whether they're of a particular gender or race or educational background. And it's a tough discussion, I believe, because people will put in various kinds of equity programs, affirmative action programs. And in my own experience, I would say that at the start, they certainly improved things. They improved hiring, they improved the way in which we assess candidates, but they keep evolving and adding elements. And my belief now is that they may have evolved past the point where they're adding value, and what they're adding is complexity and cost to a hiring system. And I haven't seen any open and intelligent discussion of this because people are afraid to do it because it'd be labeled racist or sexist or whatever. And I see that's a problem. Now, I believe that we want to eliminate racism and sexism and other forms of discrimination from hiring, but I also believe that we have to have a hiring process that is not so unwieldy that it's very difficult to make any kind of a hire. And I'm just advocating here, based on all of these questions, that what we need are fora where people can have a safe, open, respectful discussion from all sides of the issue so that we can come to a more complete understanding of what the issues are. For example, a steady state model of the economy. People say, oh, no, you got to have a growth model. Why? I haven't really seen appropriate discussions of what a reasonably steady state model would look like. So how do we do it? Well, we have the media. There are some programs. For example, I'm on TVO. I know Steve Paikin has interesting discussions with a variety of people. In the US, the PBS stations often have interesting and open discussions. And in our life, we belong to a lot of groups. And some of us belong to a variety of political parties. And one of the problems that many of the political parties have is they only talk to other people who belong to the same party. And that's not useful. What we need to do is to be able to reach out, both from political parties, religious groups, social action groups, etc., to people who maybe disagree with us and engage with them so that they and we can come to understand what we're doing better. The ultimate goal that we all must have is to build a better country, one that's fair, economically secure, where people have good education, clean air, clean water, clean food, an affordable place to live. And we need, I think, all of our brains engaged in how to do that, not in attacking each other for our political or social views. And I'm encouraging people to use some of these questions, the discussion, the issues, to engage with people that they would not normally talk to and try to come to some mutual understanding. I think if we all do that, we can go a long way towards healing some of the apparent divisions in our country. And with that, my talk is at an end, so I'll turn it back to you, Nancy.
Thank you so much, Richard. A lot of things to think about, for sure. I just want to encourage the audience. Now, Richard's going to be back on probably next month, right, Richard?
Yep.
And now, if you have any questions that you want to ask, and I'm talking about legitimate questions. I don't want any nasty, hateful stuff, because that I'll just block you. But you can send them to me on Messenger, and I will forward those questions to Richard, and he can talk about them next month, if that's what something you would like to do.
I can try to address those. I mean,
yeah,
my role isn't to answer these big questions, but to kind of encourage people to engage in discussions about them. And I would just point out, I've got another thing that we can do a little differently. I've been reading some very substantial books that deal with modern society and where we're going and some of the issues. And I thought it might be interesting if, instead of people having to read them, I could talk a little bit about the content. So one of them, I'll hold it up here, is The Tyranny of Merit. And it's by Michael Sandel, who's a fairly well-known US author. And in that book, he basically argues that our focus on merit, on who is a top, ignores the common good. and in fact has damaged our society in a number of ways. So he has some alternate views, and I would talk about that. There's a book on value and values that was written by Mark Carney, who was our ex-governor of the Bank of Canada and ex-governor of the Bank of Britain, Bank of England. Now it's 670 pages, and I read the thing and I wrote a summary, reduced it down to about 12 pages. But he has a lot of ideas about value and values and how we need to bring our society back to one that's focused on values and get away from putting value on things. So we could talk about those.
Okay, sorry, yeah, we're going to get cut off in a minute. Thank you, Richard, and to the audience, thank you so much for watching the show. I hope you continue to do so. And again, well, maybe not questions, but if you have some concerns that you want to mention, maybe that could be addressed.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Okay, so thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Peace out.
A sense of community, Chilliwack's a place to be. A sense of community where you're free. Rolling through the mountains, rolling through the valley, rolling through paradise with me. It's multicultural, you're sure to see it all. Chilliwack's the place to be, you'll see. Come party in the park, go dancing after dark. Chilliwack's the place to be, you'll see.